Hello, everybody, and good evening. I'm Don Arleth, and coming to you live from Warsaw, you're watching World News Tonight here on TVP World. They treat us very badly. They treat us terribly. This is how Donald Trump described America's relationship with the European Union on Saturday. He also announced the imposition of new tariffs, which could spark a trade war with Canada, Mexico, and China. We'll talk about the implications of this decision in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Putin launches a massive attack on Ukraine. President Zelensky calls it a war crime. A mass protest grips Serbia's second-largest city, blocking bridges across the Danube. And Georgians are not giving up their struggle for freedom, taking to the streets to fight for those in prison. U.S. President Donald Trump has delivered on his promise to impose tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, causing growing anxiety in global markets. Now, the European Union is also bracing for the possibility of their products becoming more expensive for American consumers. The 47th U.S. president is moving towards a long-feared trade war with the rest of the world. Kazimierz Wysiak reports.
Am I going to impose tariffs on the European Union? Do you want the truthful answer, or should I give you a political answer? Absolutely.
It seems it's no longer a question of if, but when will Donald Trump impose tariffs on the European Union. The American president seems to have made up his mind.
They don't take our cars. They don't take our farm products, essentially. They don't take almost anything. And we have a tremendous deficit with the European Union, so we'll be doing something very substantial with the European Union.
This rather menacing promise came on the heels of Trump slapping tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China. These were confirmed on Friday by his press secretary.
The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs on Mexico, 25% tariffs on Canada, and a 10% tariff on China for the illegal fentanyl that they have sourced and allowed to distribute into our country, which has killed tens of millions of Americans.
The European Union now braces for what the tariffs imposed on the old continent could be. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk expressed cautious optimism on his social media.
I'm sure you're all concerned with the tariffs announced by Donald Trump on the EU, including Poland. Yes, there is cause for concern, but we shouldn't be afraid. We are ready for all scenarios.
According to one expert, this optimism is not unfounded.
Europe will be forced to focus on increasing the quality of its products and lowering the costs of production. As a result of these tariffs, I think we will actually be more competitive than before.
Donald Trump says the US's trade partners are not buying enough American products. But there is a good chance that these tariffs will actually have the opposite effect than intended, drastically raising the prices for American consumers in the short term.
It can be done, but only when the difference in production costs is small. But what we are dealing with here is, so to say, a gigantic chasm. Production costs in the US are much, much higher than anywhere else.
The tariffs imposed on Canada, Mexico and China, as well as the threats made against the EU, have already shaken global markets, especially currencies. The Mexican peso dropped by 1.1% and Canada's dollar slid as much as 1.2%. It remains to be seen whether Donald Trump's America First policy will actually pay off for the United States. Kazimierz Wysiak, TVP World.
The Russian regime has carried out another massive attack on Ukrainian civilians. This time, at least 7 people were killed and 14 injured, including children. The most serious attack took place in Poltava, where a Russian missile hit a residential apartment building, partially destroying it. This is another terrorist crime by Russia, declared Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, once again appealing for increased pressure on Moscow. Now we move to our correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. Now, what more do we know about these latest Russian war crimes?
Well, the number of dead and wounded has been revised. It's 8 people now killed, including one child, and 17 people wounded in this attack. We believe that 42 missiles and 123 Shahed drones were used in this overnight attack. 22 people so far have been pulled from the rubble. That's according to the regional governor. Now, President Zelensky said in one statement released earlier on the day, every such act of terror proves that we need greater support in defending against Russian terror. President Zelensky also offered his condolences to the families of the bereaved, and it's believed that rescue operations are still ongoing throughout the night.
Okay, Oz Chatterjee, we're seeing images there of the Bristol Hotel in Odessa. Thank you for your report. Appreciate it. Ukraine has called for increased pressure on Moscow while Donald Trump announced upcoming talks with Vladimir Putin. Maybe we will do something significant, said the U.S. president on Friday, but special envoy to Ukraine says that Washington wants to increase pressure not only on Moscow, but also on Kyiv. Sonia Agata-Bishchan has more.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
It has been much more than 24 hours since U.S. President Donald Trump took office, and despite his previous pledges, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine remains unresolved. Trump has suggested that he is in talks with Putin, though he has neither confirmed nor denied whether the pair has already spoken.
Well, we'll be speaking. We'll be speaking, and I think we'll perhaps do something that'll be significant. We want to end that war. That war would have never started if I was president.
While Trump did not indicate what exactly these significant developments would entail, he told Russia to stop this, quote, ridiculous war on Truth Social last month.
If we don't make a deal, and soon, I have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries.
But it may take more than financial scare tactics for Putin to stop his war.
Putin is fighting a war here for his place in history. He's fighting a war to re-establish the Russian Empire. He's not going to be constrained by a drop in GDP.
Trump's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, retired General Keith Kellogg, has indicated that a realistic timeline towards peace in Ukraine could take months, but probably not years.
President Trump knows where to apply pressure, where not to apply pressure. But more importantly, he knows that he will create leverage with both the Ukrainians and the Russians.
He is, however, not the only one that has put faith in Trump's negotiation skills. Even the Ukrainian president previously suggested that he is hoping for his U.S. counterpart's support in bringing an end to the war.
Трамп може бути вирішальним.
Trump can be decisive. For us, this is the most important thing. His qualities are indeed there. He can be decisive in this war.
To date, Putin has indicated his willingness to negotiate an end to the war, but insists that Ukraine would have to acknowledge Russia's territorial gains. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has labeled the idea that Ukraine could fully restore its pre-war territory as misleading. He has echoed Kellogg's view that both sides would need to give something up in any negotiations.
The dishonesty lies in the fact that we somehow led people to believe that Ukraine could not only defeat Russia, but also destroy it, pushing them back to what the world looked in 2012 or 2014, before the Russians seized Crimea and other territories.
Zelensky has previously said that he would be open to Ukraine temporarily ceding territory to Russia to end the war.
From the Ukrainian side, it's not about territory anymore. This is all about security.
In January, the new American administration suspended foreign aid pending a review which would ensure alignment with its policy, which is likely to affect aspects of the Ukrainian state's operations.
The fact that we're not consistent in providing what Ukraine needs reflects the fact that we don't actually have a clear strategic objective ourselves. If we had a clear strategic objective that we wanted Ukraine to win or to be successful somehow, then we would have the right policies. There would be no disruption, even with a change of administrations.
Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, and it currently occupies about 1/5 of the country. For TVP World, Sonia Agata-Bishchan.
And in the Middle East, Vladimir Putin has a serious problem. Russia has stepped up its military withdrawal from Syria. The decision comes immediately after the country's transitional government requested the extradition of Bashar al-Assad, who's taken asylum in Moscow following the toppling of his regime late last year. These developments beg the question, what comes next for Russia's presence in the region? Zuzana Jurek reports.
A solemn retreat is what comes to mind when we look at the images of Russia's withdrawal from Syria. According to reports, Moscow has begun to remove its vehicles and containers from Tortoise Port, a strategic military base on the country's Mediterranean coast. This retreat comes shortly after a request by the transitional government in Damascus, led by the newly confirmed intermediary president Ahmed al-Shara, to extradite the toppled Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad.
The Russians are taking a preemptive action because the Syrian government has not been welcoming regarding keeping the, previously signed lease with the Russian Ministry of Defense. So the Russians are technically taking a strategic position by withdrawing their forces.
Since rebel forces emerged victorious on the streets of Syria's capital, the former dictator has taken asylum at the home of his close ally, Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Perhaps the new leadership will put as condition to give some facilities to Russia with the extradition of ex-President Bashar al-Assad.
And this is not the end of tensions between Moscow and Damascus, as the new government appears settled on rapprochement with former adversaries, a move that is welcomed by the international community.
We start with the sanctions that they need most to really start the build-up of the country, and then we see if the steps are going to the right direction.
The Kremlin, on the other hand, has attempted to cozy up to the new Syrian government.
We really have a lot in common with our Syrian friends. We have made a great contribution to the liberation of Syria from colonial dependence.
A move which is imperative to Moscow's strategic interests in the region.
If we look on the broader picture, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, also in Israel, Russia still has some ties, but these are the cooperation ties, I would say. Except Libya and Syria, they haven't got much in the Middle East right now.
Transfer troops from Syria or through Syria to Africa. Because we must remember that in Syria there was also a very important presence of the Wagner forces.
With the rapid shifts of Syria's political landscape, Russia needs to act fast if it wants to maintain its footing. In December last year, it began relocating its S-300 and S-400 air defense systems previously stationed at Tortoise Naval Base and Hamim Air Base to Libya. Though questions still persist over what the future shape of the new Russia-Syria relationship will look like.
Anti-government protests in Serbia continue, this time in Novi Sad. 3 main bridges in the city were blocked late Saturday afternoon, and the protest is expected to last 24 hours. Our Balkans correspondent Pavel Chaskovsky is there and has this next report.
The city of Novi Sad in Serbia ground to a halt on Saturday evening, with tens of thousands of protesters taking to the streets, blocking the city. The intention was to block the 3 main bridges in Novi Sad, and we are now in a very close proximity to the main bridge in the city, the Sloboda Bridge, the Bridge of Freedom. However, there are no people there for safety reasons. The bridge is blocked by farming machinery, tractors, and people are gathering here on the boulevard in tens of thousands, making a lot of noise, certainly, but also being very peaceful. One thing that we notice here, that despite the sheer size of the crowds here, there is no police presence, and still the protests here are very peaceful, and the protesters are demanding those accountable for the tragedy in Novi Sad that saw 15 people killed. They demand those responsible to be held accountable. Initially, they started the protest 3 months ago, and initially they were ignored by the government, but with time they are finally being listened to. this week. Serbia saw the Prime Minister resigning, as well as the mayor of Novi Sad. However, these moves do not seem to appease the protesters. I asked some people around whether they are not satisfied with these moves, and here's what they told me.
That's not enough. We need more. It's just one man who step up. You know, that's nothing. It's just mask. They want people to think they do something, but they don't, and we are not stupid, and we will not fall for that. We need more. We need guilty people. We need something to happen, and nothing is happening. So we need to, you know, stay here and wait for justice.
The resignation wasn't really it wasn't our demand. Our demand is for people to be processed by the law. And their resignation doesn't give us anything.
Most of all, we would like our institutions to do their jobs. If institutions start doing their jobs, then we will see everything that we need to see, and everything will happen that needs to happen.
The protesters claim that Alexander Vučić, the country's president, has overused its power over the country, and these protests are undoubtedly the biggest challenge to his power since he became the president in 2017. Whether these protests will result in the government change, time will tell. From Novi Sad, Serbia, for TVP World, I'm Paweł Trzaskowski.
Meanwhile, Georgians refused to give up the fight for their freedom. Thousands of protesters took to the streets of Tbilisi on Friday night, marching from several parts of the city towards the parliament. Gabriela Freshnak has the story.
After a few relatively quiet weeks, Georgians took to the streets en masse once again. The protest was organized in solidarity with the people arrested during the anti-government demonstrations which took place in late 2024. According to local human rights groups, some 400 people have been detained during that period, many of whom have been physically abused and denied medical care.
There are some kind of allegations about the human rights violation, but none of them have been confirmed yet officially. Yes, there are pressure, there are methods by police which are not, I would say, correspondence with European and international standards.
The UN has also published a report calling on the government to investigate allegations of excessive use of force and torture by police. Earlier this week, Brussels suspended visa-free travel to the EU for Georgian diplomats and officials, citing the violent repression by Georgian authorities against peaceful protesters, politicians, and independent media.
Sanctions on the EU level are impossible in this reality because there are two countries, at least two member states, that block this decision. I speak about Hungary and Slovakia. That's why the only thing that the European Union might do is on the nation level, where specific and certain member states will impose sanctions on those individuals who are involved in the democratic backsliding and human rights violation in Georgia.
The protests first erupted in response to Georgian Dream's unexpected victory in the parliamentary elections and intensified after Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidz's announcement that the country would delay accession negotiations with the EU until 2028.
The German Bundestag voted against a contentious migration law on Friday after emotional debate. But it was the fact that the vote was brought to the floor to the help of the far right for the first time in Germany's post-war history that has many wondering what comes next. The country heads for the polls for the general election later this month. Alex Sumlinsky has more.
After 3 hours of suspended proceedings and ugly scenes in the Bundestag, with the Greens and CDU conservatives calling each other liars, the Influx Limitation Act failed to move forward by just 12 votes. The would-be law would have limited the right of asylum seekers to bring their family members into Germany and would have allowed for wider powers of the federal police in asylum cases.
Today's event, which you are still recklessly, knowingly and deliberately provoking, is more dramatic than Wednesday's breach of taboo.
The taboo being the possibility of pushing through a non-binding motion on asylum policy that allowed for the vote on Friday. The motion passed with the support of the far-right Alternative for Germany, AfD, which was agreed to by CDU candidate for Chancellor Friedrich Merz. AfD leaders have made anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim and anti-democratic statements, and Germany's domestic intelligence agency is monitoring the party due to concerns that it may pose a threat to democracy. Merz, however, denies wanting to work with the AfD.
I have campaigned for support, not with the AfD, nor am I out in their garden.
Thousands across Germany protest against CDU and AfD and far-right policy. With just over 3 weeks before the snap federal election on February 23rd, the CDU is polling at around 30%, and Merz stands a good chance of becoming the country's next chancellor. The AfD is in second with about 20%. Thousands came out in protest when the party launched its election campaign, complete with gadgets adorned with the face of the party's leader. Experts, however, point out a CDU-AfD coalition is unlikely.
It is no way closer to forming a coalition, because it is actually the mainstream parties who will be engaging in discussions after the elections.
The German parliament has also been discussing proposals to ban the AfD party, but that could ultimately run the risk of boosting the party's standing in the upcoming federal election.
The biggest issue here is that there is indeed 20% of people who want to cast their votes against the mainstream political parties. Banning AfD will not help that. It can only actually support the image of AfD as an anti-mainstream party, and also give them the ability to call themselves also victims of the system.
For now, it seems unlikely that the AfD will form part of any ruling coalition government, even if its support rises on February 23rd. A non-binding motion to restrict immigration has sparked outrage after citizens said the conservative CDU-CSU broke a promise not to work with the far-right AfD. Protesters in Berlin gathered outside CDU headquarters. For TVP World, Alex Zemlinsky.
And now joining me to discuss the current events of the day is former Polish ambassador to Germany and France, Andrzej Bert. Hello, sir, and thank you very much for coming in.
Good evening.
Yes, great to see you. Let's start out with Germany. Looking at the state of the economy, the challenges that immigration poses, and the frustration of German citizens, are you surprised at the latest fiasco in the Bundestag?
Well, probably not, because as you know now, before the final set of debates, which will take place before the new elections, which will take place 23rd of February in Germany, individual parties have to react on the German situation. There are at least 2 points, major points. In the economic situation, as a matter of fact, the growth has stopped in Germany, and which reflects and has its impact on individual security, stability. And the second point is migration and the results of a series of very often suicidal attacks on individual citizens which took place in Germany, and therefore it has created a sense of fear, and therefore the major parties has decided to respond to that. And the major party, as a matter of fact, leading today's polls, which is CDU, CSU, Social Christian Democrats in Germany, decided to approach the subject of migration policy. It was very, I would say, sensitive, but on the other hand, very risky in such a phase of political development, pre-election atmosphere. So the 5 points program of Friedrich Merz, the chief of the CDU party, the leading party among the bilateral coalition CDU-CSU, CSU is from Bayern, Bavaria, and this 5 points program had to be voted in Bundestag, in the Parliament of Germany, and the major point was they've got the support of the right-wing, quasi, as many Germans say, fascist party, AfD, which is Alternative for Germany. And this has created a dramatic uproar because, as a matter of fact, for many dozens of years in Germany, there was kind of an unwritten pact that parties from the center of democratic scene in Germany will not support or vote seeking help from a right-wing, in particular extreme right-wing parties, like, as of today at least, is treated AfD. And the CDU and CSU party coalition has got such a support, but not on their own request. I would say it was rather not deemed to be kind of a support they asked for, but it was they parallelly looked at the situation of migrants in Germany more or less in a similar way. So this debate, which has broken out or did break out after the vote, they got a majority, very 5-6 only voices. So has made the entire produced a big earthquakes, political earthquakes in Germany, because certain parties, which in the past have been cooperating also politically on the regional level with CDU/CSU, like for instance the Green Party, officially said they will not envisage the possibility after the elections, if such a situation arises, to get a deal or enter into a coalition with CDU. Very many others, like Social Democrats, which is the second party, according to today's poll, CDU/CSU is likely to obtain something as 30% of voices, then AfD, second place, 22, and Social Democrats, for very many years, the ruling party in coalition, sometimes also with Christian Democrats, and now got only 17, and the Green Party 12. So what will happen now as a result of the debate in the Bundestag will have its impact on the, in Germany, very often very painful debates to create a new coalition, post-electoral coalition. So, as a matter of fact, the debate which has started will be, I would say, rather critical and will not probably stabilize overnight the pre-electoral political situation within Germany.
Well, we have elections coming up pretty soon, so we'll see how that all pans out. Now, changing the topic, sir, you're also the former Vice Minister of Foreign Economic Relations, Chief Polish Negotiator of all Polish trade agreements within the World Trade Organization. President Donald Trump said that the EU is treating us very badly, the Americans. Is there any truth to the claim that Europe has a trade advantage when exporting to the United States?
Well, the fact is that Europe, we say Europe, but we mean European Union countries, have got quite an extensive positive balance of trade with the United States. That's something around 350 billion of US dollars per year, which is quite an extensive one. But it's not due to the fact that the governments of the European Union as an organization has decided to stop imports from the United States. It's a result of I would say, matching of the products offered by the European companies vis-à-vis the demand in the United States. One of the big, I would say, comments from new president of the United States is that Europeans don't want to buy American cars, whereas Americans are buying European cars. The simple answer could be simple: produce good cars so they will be sold also in Europe. Europe is not buying huge American gasoline consuming cars which are entirely not adjusted to the road situation, customs on this continent. On the other side, the Europeans could reflect or say to President Bush, but you are selling nearly 100% of computers and programming to European. You are not buying our programs. You are not buying products of our European companies. So this sort of debate is a not natural way of commenting the economic situations on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean.
So, I think we can agree that the trade imbalance, the huge trade surplus that the European Union has, is there any way to somewhat solve this problem? Because it seems to me that Donald Trump's main beef is with this massive surplus, and I know that by just slapping tariffs is not going to solve this overnight.
That's clear.
So what could be a potential solution to help this trade imbalance?
Well, I would say the President Trump's request that this imbalance disappears, or at least will be reduced, is legal. he's got right to say so, but we should enter into negotiations. It was the case very many times also under the first term of Donald Trump. There have been 2 or 3 phases when Americans imposed a new, huge or higher import tariffs, but then Europeans say, okay, it's not the way to debate, to solve this problem. We have to sit down and see in what way we could respond to your, I understand, to your question, to your analysis, and find a kind of a compromise. That's the way normal democratic countries or governments should react.
Exactly. Well, let's hope before any tariffs are imposed on the European Union that the 2 sides do sit down and talk.
Hopefully they will do so.
Solve the problem. Well, sir, Andrzej Bert, former ambassador to Germany and to France, among very other prestigious titles, thank you very much for joining us
Thank you very much as well.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.